By the early 1980s, Leonid Brezhnev was already seriously ill. He had difficulty speaking, often forgot who he was looking at, and was almost unable to work independently. However, he continued to appear on television as if nothing was happening. The main reason for this was the fear of those around him. The people who had sat next to him in the Politburo for decades were afraid of change. They understood that if Brezhnev left, they could all be simply thrown out of power. The entire system depended on one elderly man who could barely stand on his feet. But no one dared to say this out loud. The General Secretary signed papers without reading them. Documents were presented to him in the correct order, and what to say was rehearsed in advance. Everything was arranged to hide Brezhnev's real condition, not only from the people, but also from himself. But the most alarming thing was the Politburo's attitude towards his health. Doctors repeatedly warned that any stress could lead to death, but the country's leadership hid even important events from Brezhnev. For example, they did not report major disasters or international conflicts to him. They were afraid that he would not be able to cope. This was not out of concern, but out of a desire to maintain the status quo at any cost. In essence, the USSR was ruled not by one person, but by a group of people hiding behind the back of an aging leader. This was the old guard, party veterans who had an interest in keeping things as they were. They did not want reforms, new faces, and certainly not someone like Andropov, who was known as a tough and cold strategist. It was at this time that tensions began to simmer within the system. Some wanted to keep everything as it was, while others understood that it was impossible to drag things out any longer. This struggle was hidden behind parades, speeches, and newspaper headlines, but behind the scenes, preparations were already underway for a change of power. When Brezhnev's health deteriorated, a silent anticipation began among the top leadership. Who would come after him? And while some hoped that everything would work itself out, one man had already begun to take action: Yuri Andropov, head of the KGB. He understood perfectly well that if he simply waited, no one would let him rise to the top. So he began to prepare in advance, calmly, quietly, as befits a man from the special services. Andropov was not just a security official. He was a strategist who knew how to read the situation. He saw how Brezhnev was weakening and that the regime's time was literally running out. He began to gather a team around him. Andropov began to promote trusted people to key positions in the KGB and even in party bodies. Not those who spoke loudly, but those who knew how to listen, report, and act. He tried to ensure that his people would be there at the right moment. In addition, he used the KGB's capabilities to their fullest extent. He had a surveillance network, wiretapping, surveillance, reports. He knew who was meeting with whom, who was dissatisfied with what, and who had what weaknesses. All this helped him to keep in check even the older and more senior members of the Politburo. Andropov understood that an open struggle for power could cost him everything. Therefore, he chose the path of quiet pressure. He did not shout or threaten. He simply created an atmosphere in which everyone knew that if anything happened, the KGB was nearby. There was no need to call them. They already knew. It was during this period that Andropov began to hold informal meetings with the military, with people from the Ministry of Defense and the Security Council. He did not say directly that he wanted to be the next General Secretary, but everyone understood where this was going. He was creating a support network in case a struggle began after Brezhnev's death. And when Brezhnev's health finally deteriorated, the struggle for his seat began even before his death. No one said anything openly, but behind the scenes there was a real Cold War going on. Everyone understood that whoever became the next General Secretary would control the country. Andropov's main rival was considered to be Konstantin Chernenko, a longtime associate of Brezhnev and a member of his inner circle. He was loyal to the party, knew the apparatus well, and was supported by those who wanted to keep things as they were. But given his age and poor health, not everyone was sure he could handle the job. One influential military figure said bluntly, "If Chernenko becomes General Secretary, we will get a second Brezhnev." This was not a compliment, it was a warning. Andrei Gromyko, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was also among the possible successors. He knew the world, had authority in the West, and was an experienced diplomat. But he did not belong to the security forces and did not know how to fight for power. Although he considered Andropov dangerous because of his ties to the KGB, he never dared to openly oppose him. Gromyko simply waited to see how the situation would unfold. Marshal Ustinov, the Minister of Defense, also had a strong position. He had the army behind him. But he had other interests. He did not aspire to the post of General Secretary, but wanted to exert influence from behind the scenes. Nevertheless, he could have become a Grey Cardinal and played a key role at a decisive moment. Some members of the Politburo hoped for a compromise figure, someone acceptable, who would hold the post for a short time, during which the system would sort itself out. But such candidates were perceived as temporary, and behind temporary figures often hide the real players. By this time, Andropov had already scored points. He had the support of the KGB, part of the General Staff, and most importantly, real information on everyone. He knew who was meeting with whom, who was saying what behind closed doors. This gave him a huge advantage. On the surface, everything looked calm. There was no panic in the newspapers, no talk of a change in power. But inside the Central Committee, there was bargaining, exchanges of promises, whispering, meetings in offices, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Every word was weighed. Every step could be the last. On October 10, 1982, Leonid Brezhnev died. But the country did not find out about it immediately. Television continued to broadcast its usual programs, and the newspapers remained silent. The news of his death did not appear on the air for almost a day. At that time, the most important events were taking place at the top of the government. The fate of the USSR was being decided. Some members of the Politburo insisted that a successor be named immediately. Others stalled for time, hoping to turn the situation to their advantage. Every move was calculated. Even the obituary that was to be read on the radio became a political weapon. The first draft of the obituary was ready 2 months before Brezhnev's death. Moreover, there were several versions, depending on who would become the next leader of the country. The necessary phrases, hints, and even markers were already prepared, so that party cadres throughout the country could understand whose line was now the main one. While the people knew nothing, a struggle for survival was taking place inside the Kremlin. Those who gave in risked losing not only their positions, but also everything they had accumulated over the years: influence, status, and sometimes even freedom. Power was not only a career, but also protection. Losing it meant being left with nothing. Andropov understood that it would be naive to simply hope for an honest vote. Many in the Politburo did not trust him, some openly feared him, and some waited to see what would happen. Therefore, he relied on what he knew best: control, pressure, and fear. Long before Brezhnev's death, the KGB had been monitoring senior officials. They tapped phones, conducted surveillance, and collected compromising information. All of this was put to good use. The day before the vote, several members of the Politburo received folders with compromising information. They contained data on abuses, ties to the West, bribes, mistresses, and shady schemes. After that, all these people suddenly voted for Andropov. But that's not all. Andropov brought in forceful support. On the day of the vote, the CPSU Central Committee building was completely under the control of the KGB Special Forces. Armed officers in plain clothes and uniform occupied all key rooms. It was not an open takeover, but everyone who entered the building could see that the KGB was in charge, and if anyone decided to vote the wrong way, the consequences would be immediate. No one dared to oppose him. Even those who did not support Andropov remained silent. Thus, behind closed doors, under the control of the KGB and under pressure from compromising information, Yuri Andropov was elected the new General Secretary. Officially, everything went unanimously, calmly, and solemnly. In reality, it was a well-planned operation in which fear proved stronger than personal ambition. But the main thing began not at the moment of election, but immediately after it. Andropov knew that intrigue alone was not enough to hold on to power. It was necessary to show everyone, both inside and outside the system, that times had changed. He began to act quickly and harshly. In his view, the country needed not fine words, but discipline and order. And to make sure that everyone felt this order, he started at the very top. In just the first month of Andropov's rule, more than 18 high-ranking officials were dismissed from the system. Some of them had worked with Khrushchev and Brezhnev. Their careers seemed untouchable, but Andropov did not care. He purposefully got rid of those who were used to working the old way, solving problems through connections, turning a blind eye to corruption, sabotaging new ideas. This wave of dismissals was not just a personnel reshuffle. It was a clear signal to the entire party system. Things are different now. Either you work or you leave. And it worked. Panic broke out in the corridors of power. Everyone understood that they were now being watched. Every step, every mistake could be their last. But Andropov did not stop at dismissals. He went further. Show arrests began. First of all, in the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Trade. These structures had long been mired in corruption. For years, people had been enriching themselves at the expense of shortages, kickbacks, and connections. Andropov decided to strike at them immediately. Not quietly, but in full view of everyone. These arrests were covered in the media. The names of those detained were made public. This was done deliberately, to scare the rest, so that every official understood if it was possible to come to an agreement before, now it was not. Now they could come for you at any moment. And indeed, a wave of inspections swept across the country. KGB and prosecutor's office employees traveled to the regions, dug up old cases, and conducted sudden audits. Those who had relaxed during the years of Brezhnev's stagnant stability and believed that the system was running on inertia were particularly hard hit. When the country learned of Brezhnev's death, calm stories were shown on television and in newspapers. Everything looked strict, solemn, and, most importantly, without panic. Officially, it was said that the General Secretary had passed away peacefully and that the transfer of power had gone smoothly, without disputes or conflicts. Andropov became General Secretary as if by the will of the collective, by decision of the party. The most surprising thing is that many documents about this transfer of power are still classified, even though more than 40 years have passed. Neither researchers nor historians nor even former officials have access to all the details.